Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mission Practical, where we talk about the spiritual and the practical side of missions. Uh, today, we're tackling something that a lot of people wonder about. I get a lot of these questions a lot, all the time, really. Not just what they believe, but how do different evangelical denominations actually do missions? Um, not I don't want to get into the structure about, their different belief systems or their different ways, that differ from mine or anything like that. This is just informational. This is just to give you the practical outlook of this. Um, a lot of evangelical denominations are very different. Even if you get into evangelical Lutherans or the Southern Baptists versus the Independent Baptist, or a lot of different things. And so people have a lot of questions about how missions works. How does it work around the world? How do different people fund their ministries? And to be quite honest with you, there is so many different ways that people do missions nowadays, even within the circles I run in. um so, but how do they fund it, structure it, send missionaries, and sustain the work? If you're a pastor, missionary, or church member trying to understand the landscape, this will help you. Let's walk through it together. So, the question that we're answering today is, how do different evangelical denominations actually do missions? Not just what they believe, but how they fund it, structure it, send missionaries, and sustain the work. This is very important to understand because there's a lot of different ways to do it, and very limited. And some people will probably not like what I'm saying right now, but there is a very limited, or let me say open way of structuring missions within Scripture. And we have little snippets here and there about how Paul did his missionary journey. We're not really sure, of like people like Philip and Nathaniel who went very far on their mission. You see different things and different ways that they did it. There was a time where Paul was a tent maker talking to business people. We're not sure how much he used that tent making skill to do missions. Then we also see churches coming and supplying his need on mission. So we're not going to get into the down and dirty things of, what these different denominations believe, whether I agree with them or I don't agree with them, and understand that nothing that we say here is me supporting anything in particular. This is just a practical understanding. This is not getting into the theological, doctrinal, or even my opinion state of things. So the first denomination that we're going to look at is the Southern Baptist model. The Southern Baptists in the United States are still the largest evangelical mission sending agency in our country. Their mission arm is known as the International Mission Board. And while some of the things I'm going to talk about, there are different avenues in the Southern Baptist Church for missions. I've met a few of them that have, maybe they didn't pass the rigid structure of the International Mission Board, and they went out kind of on their own and funded themselves. I remember I was at a meeting one time and I saw a guy, it just struck me as strange. He had a table like mine, he was setting it up, and and he was out there, him and his kids, passing out cards, trying to get different pastors to support him. And so there are in all these areas different strategies, different ways of doing things. But how they do it, the churches give to what's called a cooperative program. Now this includes both the International Mission Board. It includes North American Baptist Missions, which is the church planning arm in the United States for the Southern Baptists. And they have two separate mission boards, but they're cohesive in the way that churches give to the cooperative program. Money is pooled nationally. Missionaries are salaried, meaning that the average Southern Baptist missionary you run into on the field do get a paycheck, and that's given to them through the fundraising that they do through a couple of different giving opportunities throughout the year. But the average church will give, probably 6 to 10 to even above to support the cooperative program, which funds the missions of the Southern Baptist Church. Missionaries are they do not raise their own support, so like there's no deputation. That's a big word here. That's when we as missionaries go out and we call churches and we send letters and we get in our car and we travel all over creation trying to find support. And but within the Southern Baptists, it's highly structured the way they do it. In fact, most of their missionaries are not allowed to go and request support from a church. And so, I remember, with North American Baptist missions, you could in that level, develop partnerships with different churches and they would support you because most of your North American Baptist missionaries are not fully funded. It's the foreign missionaries that are. But it is highly structured. There's rigid process. There's an interview process. They look at your medical records. They have a lot of hoops and hurdles to cross. Some different criteria that you have to meet. And so it is kind of, you are applying, yes, for a ministry, but you're also applying for a job, and that's kind of how it works. It's highly screened, meaning that you as a missionary candidate are going to be put under a microscope. They're going to check your education. They're going to check your knowledge base. They're going to check your seriousness. They're going to check your medical records, and what they're looking for is a long-term focus. They don't want to invest in you and then a year later you're leaving the field, and that kind of puts them in a bind under this model. So that's the basics of the Southern Baptist model, even though it can, branch out into different things. The next one I want to look at is the Assembly of God model. This is the one that I kind of heavily researched. I had some questions about this one. Maybe some misunderstandings. I thought they would practically be more like the SBC and a lot of things that they do, but come to find out, they're probably more like the model of missions that I do. Through the Assembly of God's World Missions, a different model is kind of used than the Southern Baptist model. How they do it is missionaries raise 100% of their support, meaning they do deputation. They travel from church to church. They build partnerships. They cast visions personally to the church, the vision that God, has given them. There's a strong emphasis on church planning, Bible schools, and of course the Pentecostal distinctives. There's a lot of things that they do that are probably very similar to an independent missionary. But as far as I can see, they just go church to church and they raise their funds. There are, with both of these models, let me back up a minute. With both of these models, there are some strengths and some challenges to them. Now, with the Southern Baptists, the strength would be stability and kind of a massive outreach that they would have. And they really do. I mean, I run into, SBC missionaries, all over the world. And, they do some different things that probably we couldn't do as missionaries, especially in the field of medicine and other things. But, there is a strength to their model, and the biggest strength is stability. That I've seen, they're really good at setting up and maintaining, and they work with the nationals to teach them how to set it up within their system. The challenge of the Southern Baptist movement is there's not a lot of flexibility, and it would be a slower movement sometimes. Like, if you go to the mission field and you were hired to go to a particular place to do a particular thing, and you get there and you need to change that, there's a process you got to go through and be like, look, I got to the field, but it looks to me like God's calling me to do this. They're going to look at that and be like, well, we sent you to do this, and so now you're changing, and we're going to check this out. Now, they more than likely will probably follow what the missionary has in mind, but it's just going to take a little bit longer time to get there because of the way that their structure is built. Whereas if you go to this model, with the Assemblies of God, and with independent missions, uh, there's, and I'm going to be very careful when I say this, there is a strength to this. Number one is passion, it's rapid expansion sometimes. And there's also some flexibility. I mean, you get to the mission field, and God may move you to a different ministry than you even had thought. You may not have even know something like that exists, and you have the flexibility to do that. People are kind of supporting you, not the program in this model. The challenge is support raising. And from somebody who's done something like this for almost 25 years now, the support raising can be intense, and you have to really look at that on that level. But the next one I want to talk about is, this was something very interesting to me, is the Presbyterian, the Reform model. Now, when we say a word like Reformed, we're talking about Reformed theology, and we're talking about this model that the Presbyterians would have. Groups like the Presbyterian Church in America, they operate through an organization called Missions to the World. Okay. They use kind of a hybrid model. Some centralized funding is there, but there is some support raising. Okay, so it's kind of a mix between both the SBC and the Assemblies of God that we've already talked about. And it's kind of a hybrid model, to where there is some funding available through the Presbyterian Reform model, but there is also that where, okay, we've got some centralized funding, but at the same time, you if you want to do this, you need to go raise this yourself. um there's strong Presbyterian oversight in this one, whereas, say, that would probably make it a little bit more like the SBC, to where your higher ups within the Presbyterian ranks are kind of overseeing your ministry and overseeing your mission. um that's a big one, and some people thrive in situations like that, some people don't. I would probably fall on the one that wouldn't. But they're there is strong Presbyterian oversight. There are a hierarchy within the Presbyterian Church. Heavy emphasis on theological training and church planning. This is what their model for missions is, and so not only do they do church planning, but there is a heavy emphasis on theological training, which means getting people deep into Reformed theology, and making sure that the people understand that. Um, so the strength in the Presbyterian model is that deep doctrine and leadership training that they do. They're big on getting in your brain and dumping that stuff in there. But there's a deep doctrine and leadership training within the Presbyterian Church. That's a lot of their focus. The challenge is, from what I can see and what I've read, there's a slower mobilization process, because you're kind of, you yourself, if you're going to teach that deep theology, you yourself have to have an understanding of the deep theology, which probably means before you go to the field, you're going to school for a pretty decent amount of time. And also after that, if you don't have enough funds within the centralized funding, then you have to go in and do some fundraising, go and do some deputation work. And so there could be kind of a slower mobilization process. The next model I want to look at too, this one intrigued me a little bit, but the Evangelical Free Church of America. It's kind of an organizational model for evangelical churches that don't, say, fall under uh, a denominational category. These churches can be made up of several different churches. Um, this is through Reach Global. Now, don't get that confused with Reach Missions that I'm a part of, but but this is all done through Reach Global, which is their mission agency. I'm not sure if they have other mission agencies. I looked and I don't really see one. Somebody can put that down in the comments if they know of multiple mission agencies within this movement, because it's hard to nail it down because it is made up of so many different things. But according to Reach Global, this is where some of this information comes from. The Evangelical Free Church of America mostly operates through them. And so how do they do it? Again, you have kind of a hybrid model. Within this church, it leans heavily into team-based missions. I have seen some of these teams going out on airplanes and other things, talking to people. It leans heavily into team-based missions. Wouldn't that be awesome? And missionaries join established teams. Okay, so like if you're going to be a missionary, you're going to join Team Red over here, and you're going to go do mission with Team Red. Or if you look over here at Team Blue, you're going to go join them, and their mission fits what you believe God has asked you to do. And then so you're going to team up with Team Blue, and you're going to go on mission together, into missions. Most raise their own support in this model. They go to the various churches, or they raise support through individuals, or however they can do it. And so they do raise their own support. So the strength in this, of course, is collaboration. I can't tell you how awesome it would be to go to the mission field as a team. Always you go to the field, and one of the first things is to create a team, which that kind of slows it down a little bit. But if you go to the field and you're already in an established team, man, you got that accountability, you got other things. This is something I would love to see come into the model that we're involved in. But that collaboration is a very major strength. The challenge is it requires strong team dynamics. Okay, any of you that have ever played sports, you worked in a team, you do this, you got your guys who are happy just to be there. You got other guys who kind of take a more diva approach to the team. You got all these different personalities, and so everything that you do is going to rely on how strong your team leader is, and how much people support the team leadership. And that's always a challenge. But it's kind of one that you can overcome with the right kind of things. But so it does require strong team dynamics, which if the team falls apart under this model, your mission falls apart, and you have to go back to America and get some new team members. You have to do these things. So I could see where that could kind of get into some sketchy situations sometimes. But man, if you get a good team and you go to the field as a team missionary, that would be great. So now we get into the independent Baptist model. This is the model that I've functioned in for about 25 years. I've probably done some different things, hybrid type stuff, but the independent Baptist model it's a hard one to understand. But mostly there is not one central missions agency. You need to understand that there are many. Okay. I've been a part of two in my mission, fixing to be part of three, and that type of thing. But there's no central missions agency. There are multiple missions agencies. They could be run out of a college, they could be run alongside of a college, they could be run out of a church or alongside of a church. You're going to find most agencies are independent of, say they may be sitting next to a church, but the agency itself is independent. But in the independent Baptist model, the local church is always the authority. So it doesn't matter if you're part of an agency. If you yourself have a problem as a missionary, that agency is going to contact your pastor normally and deal with the problem through your church, because there in the IFB there is a strong local church functionality, which means that I don't work for that agency. I work under my church and under my pastor. And so that's where most people don't understand that. Our agencies are primarily there to help us raise funds. They're there to help us navigate the challenges of, like tax season. They're there to help us navigate the challenges of, who's going to take care of my financial needs while I'm abroad, that type of thing. Different agencies do different things. There is mission board, there's a mission agency, and then there's the clearinghouse, which basically the clearinghouse is only about your funds. You have your own board basically made up of different things. There's one I'm looking at right now that they require you to have 3 pastors that make up your board, and then they handle your finances. And if there's an issue, they're gonna call those 3 pastors and deal with the issue that way. Or you have like a mission board, which may have a more of a governing body. They got a board of men that are watching you as missionaries. They're helping you and things like that. Then you have mission agencies, which are kind of a hybrid of the two. And so that's the best way you can really understand it. But under this model, the missionary raises 100% of their support. I'm responsible to raise all my support. And, we've traveled around, probably in 25 years, we've probably visited, anywhere from 300 to 600 churches. The average missionary would visit in that length of time. We develop partnerships with the local churches. We do different things, and, we update every local church every month, and we're responsible for everything we do. We're responsible for, say, our websites. We're responsible for correspondence. We're responsible for, answering questions if those churches have those questions. We are sent by a local church, which means that, our governing body is our local church and our local church pastor. We partner with churches directly. We maintain strong church autonomy. And the focus is usually amongst, independent Baptist missionaries, and this can vary a little bit, but the primary focus is church planning, national leadership training, and developing indigenous works, which means that we want to take our local independent church model, we want to take that to the mission field, and we want them to have a local church model too. And so, there's a big heavy emphasis sometimes on church planning, national leadership training, and indigenous works. But there are also others who do different things, with medical missions and all that kind of stuff. And so, there's a variety of different types of missionaries within the independent Baptist model. And so, you know, the best way I can say it sometimes is blessed chaos, but it all works together, but there is a structure, and a structure that you would be working in, and that's, between you, God, and your pastor, and that's the model of the independent Baptist. Just a brief overview of that model. So the other one is interdenominational agencies. This one is kind of people that don't fit in, say, to any of these other models. They may partner with some of the other ones, or different things like that. But here we're talking about organization like Wycliffe Bible Translators, SIM, Youth with a Mission. The most of these are specialized, either they're working on Bible translations, they're working on medical missions, or Doctors Without Borders, that type of thing. Youth mobilization. Well, when I say Doctors Without Borders, I'm talking about Doctors Without Borders with an emphasis on Christ. Okay. But youth mobilization is another good one sometimes. But how they do it is most require the missionaries to raise their own support. They're either self-funded, or they develop partnerships, maybe even out of the church. They go into businesses and other things, and or they just fund themselves. I've seen that, especially with the doctors and things like that. So this is a model that it's hard to kind of nail down how they do it. You can visit each of these and see how they do it themselves, but they do raise their own support in these interdenominational agencies. So to wrap it all up, what we can learn from learning about the other agencies and different models and different strategies and things like that is, we take what's important out of each and every model. And so out of every model, one thing they're all trying to do is obey the Great Commission. Whether you agree with them or not, they are actively trying to obey the Great Commission as stated by Christ, in Matthew 28, Mark 16, Acts 1. And this is just how different churches, different organizations take the Great Commission and do things. There are different structures, but kind of the same mission. Some emphasize stability, they emphasize speed, they emphasize theology, flexibility, specialization. But there's a key question that you need to ask for your church and for you. The key question for you is not which one is right, but which model best aligns with your doctrine, your missions philosophy, and your calling. If you're a missionary and you're watching this, that's a decision you have to make with the Lord. Where I know which one I prefer, others have different reasons that they prefer something else, and that's okay, because like I said, there's not a huge direct command, this is how you do it. In Scripture, there are different things that allude to, like, I believe Scripture is alluding to the local church. They're alluding to those things, but on the other hand, the mission that Christ left us is massive. And sometimes, if we get out there and we get in our own little world or our own little camp, the mission becomes so great that you can't do it. And a lot of times we let these little things, give us a smaller vision than God wants us to have. And so you just got to look at that, for yourself and decide there. Here, I'm just dumping information at you and telling you how different people do different things. And, sometimes you can learn from other people. But here's my challenge. If you're a pastor and you're watching this, do you understand how your missionaries are funded? Have you ever sat down and talked to your missionaries and asked them how they are funded, what they feel about it, or things like that? Do you really understand the funding model that missionaries have? And I believe that's very important as a pastor, to understand that funding model, the oversight especially. What's the accountability? What's all those things? And because you get somebody out there who's not accountable, and they're out there and you don't know where your money's going. And so it's good for you to know that as a pastor. If you're a missionary, do you understand the strengths and weaknesses of your model? It's very important to understand both. And all models have both strengths and weaknesses. And When you understand those, it helps you to develop the strong parts of your model. And it also helps you to look at the weaknesses from a realistic approach. And you're looking at the weaknesses, and you come up with strategies to overcome those weaknesses. And it's very important you understand both. As a missionary, it just nothing is perfect. And when you sit down and you look at the weaknesses versus the strengths, you can really make some decisions that will highly impact your fundraising efforts. You'll make some decisions that will highly impact your ministry and your personal walk with God. And all those things come together for a great vision for the ministry that God has given you. If you're a church member, my challenge to you is are you praying? Are you giving? Are you engaging intentionally in missions? Because we're all responsible for the Great Command. We're all responsible for the command that Christ left us to go into all the world, reach the gospel, reach everybody with the gospel, and make disciples, and teach them everything that He has commanded us. We're all responsible for the model laid out in Acts 1. We go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. And as a church member, you need to be engaged in missions, and you need to be intentionally engaged in those things. Missions is not a theory. Missions is practical, is strategic, and it always requires clarity. So, understanding missions, understanding the different ways people do things is important. You can glean some understanding from somebody you may not be able to sit down in a room and agree with, but you can learn something from them. A great book that I highly recommend everyone to read is called The God Ask. And it gives you some different ideas. Some of them may work in your denomination, some of them may not, but it is a great book. I'll put a link down below to Amazon, to where, if you want to order that, you can get it on Kindle, you can get it on Audible, you can get a printed copy if you want that. As a missionary, it's hard to travel with a lot of printed books, so I do use a lot of Kindle. I use a lot of digital books, and I use Audible all the time. But The God Ask is a great book, and so I'll put a link to that down below. That might help you if you're out there on your own and you have to go out there and raise support. So this is Missions Practical, where we live out the Great Commission both spiritually and strategically. If this has helped you, share it with your missions committee or pastor, and we will see you next time. And thank you so much for watching.